I didn't wake up that morning expecting my life to take a turn I couldn't explain. It was just supposed to be a regular Monday. Work, emails, meetings, the drive home to my wife and kids. A predictable routine. And honestly, I liked it that way. Stability is comforting, and after 10 years of marriage, you start to crave it like air. But that day, everything shifted. And it all started because I was 5 minutes late. The dashboard clock flashed 7:45 a.m., and I had to be in the office by 8. Wow. Normally, I wouldn't have risked speeding through the back roads, but I didn't have time to sit behind some minivan doing 10 under the limit. So, I hit the gas. Big mistake. Just as I passed the last traffic light, those dreaded red and blue lights lit up behind me. My heart dropped. Damn it, I muttered, pulling over to the side of the road. I rolled down the window and drummed my fingers on the steering wheel, trying to stay calm. I was already imagining how annoyed my boss would be when I walked into the morning meeting. Late. I heard the click of boots on asphalt, and when I glanced in the side mirror, I saw her. The officer had short blonde hair tucked neatly under her hat, aviators shading her eyes, and a posture that told me she wasn't someone to mess with. "License and registration," she said, her voice professional but not cold. I fumbled in the glove box, handing her the documents while mumbling an apology about running late for work. She didn't say much, just nodded and walked back to her cruiser. I sighed, leaning back in my seat, hoping she'd cut me some slack. But when she returned, she handed me a ticket without a word. I was about to thank her for not giving me a harsher penalty when I noticed it. On the back of the ticket, scrawled in blue ink, was a phone number. No explanation, no name, just the digits standing out like they were daring me to react. I stared at it, confused. Did she mean to do that? Was it a joke, or had she slipped it to me intentionally? My mind raced, but before I could say anything, she tipped her hat and walked back to her cruiser. For the rest of the drive to work, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Why would a police officer hand out her number like that? I wasn't some smooth-talking guy who'd flirted my way out of a ticket. I was a married man in a gray suit with coffee stains on my tie. I was boring, safe, invisible, at least when it came to things like this. I shoved the ticket into my glove compartment when I pulled into the office parking lot, trying to shake the thought from my head. But throughout the day, it kept creeping back in. By the time I got home that evening, my curiosity had turned into something stronger, a restless, nagging pull that wouldn't let go. My wife, Lisa, was making dinner when I walked through the door. The smell of garlic and tomato sauce filled the kitchen, and for a second, I felt grounded again. This was my life, a good life. We had 2 kids, a mortgage, weekend trips to the lake, and shared laughter over burned pancakes on Sunday mornings. But even as I kissed her cheek and asked about her day, the memory of that number scratched at the back of my mind. I sat on the couch after dinner, scrolling mindlessly through my phone. But my thoughts weren't really on the screen. They were on the ticket hidden in my car. I told myself it didn't mean anything. People do strange things sometimes, right? Maybe she'd made a mistake, or maybe she was messing with me. But the more I tried to dismiss it, the more I felt this gnawing urge to know. By 10 p.m., Lisa had gone to bed, and the house was quiet except for the hum of the fridge. I found myself standing in the garage, opening the glove compartment and pulling out the ticket. The number stared back at me, and before I could second-guess myself, I punched it into my phone. My fingers trembled as I hit call. The phone rang twice before she answered. "I thought you wouldn't call," she said, her voice softer this time, almost amused. My breath hitched. I didn't know what to say. I hadn't planned this far ahead. Yeah, I wasn't sure if I should." "I figured you'd be curious," she replied, and there was something in her tone that made my skin prickle. "You seemed like the type." "The type?" I echoed, unsure whether I should feel flattered or insulted. "The type who's been stuck in the same routine for too long," she said. "Am I wrong?" I felt exposed, like she'd reached through the phone and pulled out something buried, deep inside me. "I'm married," I blurted, as if that could explain away the situation or put up a wall between us. "I know," she said, and my heart skipped a beat. There was a pause, and I thought she might hang up, but instead she asked, "Do you want to meet for coffee sometime? No expectations, just a conversation." I should have said no. I knew that. But there was something intoxicating about the way she spoke, like she saw a version of me that I didn't even know existed. Someone who wasn't just a husband, a father, or an employee. Someone who could be interesting again. "I don't think that's a good idea," I said, but my voice lacked conviction. "I'll leave it up to you," she said, "but I don't think you called just to say no." When the call ended, I sat there in the dim garage, the phone still in my hand. My heart was pounding, and guilt crept in like a shadow I couldn't shake. I thought about Lisa sleeping just a few rooms away, about the promises we made on our wedding day. But there was also a part of me, a darker, selfish part, that was intrigued. I went back inside and slid into bed, careful not to wake Lisa. As I lay there staring at the ceiling, I told myself I'd forget about the number and move on. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't be that easy. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, dissecting every word she said and every response I gave. I wanted to convince myself that calling her had been a momentary lapse in judgment, just a slip of curiosity that didn't mean anything. But curiosity has a way of growing roots when you try to ignore it. By the time the sun peeked through the bedroom curtains, I felt like I was already losing a battle I hadn't officially started fighting. Lisa was up before me, getting the kids ready for school. I could hear the clinking of breakfast plates and the sounds of cartoons playing in the background. This was my life, stable, predictable, and filled with love. But as I sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing the sleep from my eyes, the only thing I could think about was the police officer. I didn't even know her name, and yet she had planted herself in my head like an itch I couldn't scratch. I told myself I wouldn't call her again. I had crossed a line once, but it wasn't too late to backtrack. People make mistakes all the time, and this could just be one of mine. Something to tuck away and forget about. So, I went through the motions of my morning routine, kissed Lisa goodbye, and headed to work like nothing had happened. But it didn't take long for the cracks to show. I found myself checking my phone obsessively throughout the day, half hoping and half dreading that she might text me. By lunchtime, the temptation was gnawing at me so fiercely that I couldn't concentrate on anything else. I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing I shouldn't jump but leaning forward anyway. At 2 p.m., my phone buzzed. My heart skipped a beat, and when I saw the text, I knew I was in trouble. Unknown number. Still curious? I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. This was the moment where I could shut it all down. I could delete the message, block the number, and pretend none of this ever happened. But instead, I found myself typing back, "Me. Maybe." Her reply came instantly. Unknown number. "Coffee tonight, no strings attached, just two people talking?" I hesitated. I could hear my conscience screaming at me to stop, but there was something about the way she framed it that made it feel harmless. No strings attached. Just coffee. A conversation. I wasn't doing anything wrong by talking to someone, right? People meet for coffee all the time. It didn't have to mean anything. Before I could overthink it, I typed out a response. Me. Where? She sent the address of a small cafe on the other side of town, far enough that I wouldn't run into anyone I knew. I told myself it was a one-time thing just to get this out of my system. I'd meet her, satisfy my curiosity, and then go home to my wife, guilt-free. At least, that's what I wanted to believe. The cafe was quiet when I arrived. A bell above the door jingled as I stepped inside, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air. I spotted her immediately. She wasn't in uniform this time. She wore a fitted leather jacket over a plain black t-shirt, her blonde hair falling loosely around her shoulders. She looked different, more relaxed, but still carried that same air of confidence. When she saw me, she smiled and waved me over. My stomach twisted with a mix of excitement and dread as I sat down across from her. "Glad you came," she said, sliding a coffee cup toward me. "I probably shouldn't have," I admitted, and she laughed softly. "That's what makes it interesting, doesn't it?" I didn't know how to respond, so I sipped the coffee, letting the warmth calm my nerves. For a moment, we sat in silence, and I considered walking out before things went any further. But then she leaned in slightly, her eyes locking onto mine. "So, what's the story?" she asked. "Why does a married man take the risk of calling a cop who slipped him her number?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut, but she wasn't wrong. Why had I called her? What was I looking for? I could have blamed it on curiosity or the excitement of doing something forbidden. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. "I don't know," I admitted, setting the cup down. "Maybe I'm just tired." She tilted her head, studying me like she was piecing together a puzzle. "Tired of what?" "Of everything," I wanted to say. "Of waking up every day to the same routine, of feeling like a ghost in my own life, of being the guy who always did the right thing but never felt alive." But instead, I said, "Marriage can be hard." She nodded, as if she understood exactly what I meant. "I get it. Sometimes you forget who you are outside of being someone's husband or dad." Her words hit too close to home, and I felt my defenses crumbling. "Yeah, exactly." She leaned back in her chair, tapping her fingers lightly on the table. "I'm not here to judge you," she said. "I'm just curious. What do you want from this?" I opened my mouth to answer, but nothing came out. I didn't know what I wanted. Was I looking for an escape? A thrill? Or was I just desperate? To feel noticed by someone who saw me as more than just a man stuck in a routine? The silence stretched between us, and she didn't push me to fill it. After a moment, she smiled again, softer this time. "It doesn't have to be complicated," she said. "Sometimes people just need a reminder that they're still capable of feeling something different." Her words sank into me like a weight I couldn't shake off. I felt torn between two versions of myself. The man who loved his wife and kids, and the man sitting here craving something that had been missing for a long time. "I don't know if I can do this," I whispered, more to myself than to her. She reached across the table, her fingers brushing against mine. "I'm not asking you to make a decision right now," she said. "Just be honest with yourself." The touch of her hand was electric, and for a moment, I forgot where I was. I forgot about Lisa, about the kids, about everything, except this woman sitting across from me, making me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in years. We sat there for another hour, talking about everything and nothing. She told me about her job, how she'd been a cop for 6 years and was thinking of leaving the force. I told her about my work, how it felt like I was just going through the motions. It was easy, natural, like we'd known each other for longer than just a day. When it was time to leave, she stood up and smiled. "Think about what you want," she said, "and if you figure it out, you know how to reach me." As I drove home, my mind was a whirlwind of emotions. I felt exhilarated, guilty, and terrified all at once. I had crossed a line tonight, and I knew it. But instead of feeling regret, all I could think about was how much I wanted to see her again. I pulled into my driveway that night with a heavy knot of guilt tangled in my chest. The house was dark, except for the glow of the porch light, and as I sat there with the engine idling, I debated whether I should just turn around and drive somewhere, anywhere, so I wouldn't have to face Lisa. But I knew running wasn't the answer. So I killed the engine, took a deep breath, and stepped inside. The house was quiet, the kids already asleep, and the faint scent of lavender lingered in the air from the diffuser Lisa liked to leave on in the evenings. I found her in the bedroom, sitting cross-legged on the bed with her laptop propped against her knees. She looked up when I walked in and smiled. "You're home late," she said, closing the screen. "Long day." "Yeah," I mumbled, kicking off my shoes. Traffic was a nightmare. I hated lying to her, but what else could I say? "Sorry, honey. I was having coffee with a woman who made me feel things I haven't felt in years." I climbed into bed beside her and kissed her forehead, but the gesture felt hollow. She didn't seem to notice. She leaned into me, resting, her head on my shoulder, and for a moment, I felt the crushing weight of what I was doing. Lisa wasn't perfect, no one is, but she was good to me. She cared. She put up with my mood swings when work stressed me out. She laughed at my stupid jokes, and she was the kind of mother who packed little notes in the kids' lunchboxes just to remind them they were loved. How could I betray someone like that, and Yet, even as I held her, all I could think about was the way the officer's hand had felt when she touched mine. The warmth, the spark, the possibility of something new. I barely slept that night. My mind was a storm of conflicting emotions, guilt, desire, fear. I knew I was heading down a dangerous path, but the pull of temptation was stronger than I ever imagined it could be. The next few days were torture. I tried to throw myself into work, into family dinners and bedtime stories, but the officer lingered in the back of my mind like a song I couldn't get out of my head. Every time my phone buzzed, my pulse spiked, hoping it was her and hating myself for wanting it to be. Then on Thursday, it happened. A text from her. Unknown number. Have you figured it out yet? I stared at the message for what felt like an eternity. I wanted to ignore it, delete it, and prove to myself that I could be the man Lisa thought I was. But instead, my fingers betrayed me. Me. I don't know what I'm doing. Her response was almost immediate. Unknown number. Then maybe you should find out. The message was simple, but it hit me like a punch to the gut. I knew what she was offering, and the part of me that craved escape wanted to take it. But I also knew that once I crossed that final line, there'd be no coming back. I didn't reply. Instead, I spent the rest of the day in a haze, pretending to be fine while my mind raced. By the time I got home, I felt like I was suffocating. Lisa was in the kitchen, helping our daughter with her math homework, and the sight of them together was almost enough to snap me out of it. Almost. I kissed Lisa on the cheek and told her I needed to go for a drive to clear my head. She didn't ask questions. She trusted me. The irony of that trust burned like acid in my chest as I grabbed my keys and walked out the door. I didn't have a destination in mind, but my hands seemed to know where they were going. 15 minutes later, I was parked outside the same cafe, where we had met. My heart pounded as I sat there debating whether to go inside. I could still turn back. I could go home, confess everything to Lisa, and beg her to forgive me. But the thought of facing her disappointment was too much to bear. Before I could change my mind, my phone buzzed. Unknown. Number. I'm upstairs. Room 204. My breath hitched, and for a moment I just stared at the screen, paralyzed. This was it, the line in the sand. Once I crossed it, there'd be no undoing it. My marriage, my family, everything I had built with Lisa, it would all be hanging by a thread. But then I thought about how I felt when I was with the officer. How, for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a man trapped in a cycle of obligations and routines. I felt alive, and that thought was enough to make me move. I stepped out of the car, my legs shaking as I made my way to the hotel entrance. The elevator ride felt like it lasted an eternity, and by the time I reached the second floor, I could barely breathe. I stood outside room 204, my hand hovering over the doorknob. This was the moment. But then, something stopped me. It wasn't guilt or fear. It was a memory. I saw Lisa's face in my mind, the way she looked at me on our wedding day, her eyes filled with hope and trust. I thought about our kids, how they'd run to the door every evening to greet me like I was their hero. And I realized that if I walked through that door, I'd destroy all of it. I backed away, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I stumbled down the hallway and into the stairwell, taking the stairs two at a time until I was outside, gasping for air. I leaned against the wall, my heart pounding like it was trying to break free from my chest. I pulled out my phone and blocked her number. Then I deleted every text, every trace of her. As I sat in my car, trembling, I realized how close. I'd come to ruining everything. One more step, and my life would have been unrecognizable. When I got home, Lisa was already asleep. I crawled into bed beside her, tears stinging my eyes as I pulled her close. She stirred slightly, mumbling something in her sleep, before settling against me. I buried my face in her hair, silently vowing to be better. The next morning, I woke, up early and made breakfast for the kids. Lisa walked into the kitchen, surprised but smiling, and kissed me on the cheek. "What's the occasion?" she asked. Nothing, I said, forcing a smile. Just wanted to do something nice. But deep down, I knew the truth. This wasn't just a gesture, it was a second chance, and I wasn't going to waste it. The temptation had almost destroyed me, but in the end, I remembered what mattered most. It wasn't the spark of something new. It was the steady flame of what I already had, and the realization that I couldn't let it burn out.